All right. We are officially live. A couple of minutes before start. Get this set up and see who shows up. So, yeah, we have no viewers at the moment, but for any of y'all who are watching it in the future, hello, welcome. At the moment, we are just past the 1 minute mark on the video. I will, like at the midterm, something I thought about partway through the whole thing. I will try and let you know if people have shown up every, say, 10 minutes at least on the video. So every 10 minutes on the timestamp, you should be able to check in and see whether or not I am answering questions or if there are no people. I'll give a brief little check in saying, still waiting or something like that, and let you know to go ahead 10 minutes more into the future of the video and check and see if people have shown up. If they have, I'll tell you to go back and yeah. So basically, just to make sure that if you're watching this after the fact, you don't have to sit through 20 minutes of quiet or me rambling or whatever else before getting to the actual review material. If you didn't make it, don't feel bad about it. I know that the scheduling is difficult this time of year, especially since I had to work around my schedule and finals and everything else. So that this review wasn't scheduled on top of either any exams that you might be taking during the day, the final set of material here during dead week, not getting in the way of study time and things on the weekends, and working around my own deadlines and projects because I kind of have to be here to be able to do the review. So for those of you who couldn't watch live, I'm sorry about the timing if that was the reason why you couldn't make it, but there's only so much I can do. So yeah. So nobody here at the moment. We'll just hang out. I'll ramble a little bit, talk a little bit, recline in my seat with a very flattering view, I guess, and check back in at the 10-minute mark on the video, and I'll let you know whether or not anybody's shown up and whether or not we're actually going over material. I will say probably the saddest thing about the review and not having anybody here is that I'm talking and possibly going over material and stuff, and I'm out of coffee. There is no coffee to be had, and I can't go out and get any. I'm currently live from the Matchbox co-working studio downtown, which is my alternate office compared to Purdue, because I share that office with 3 other people and have to park at least 15 minutes away. So I got a subscription here to, well, allow for this sort of thing much more easily, continue writing, work on a few things for side job stuff. And there's free coffee here, and it's fantastic. It's Copper Moon coffee, so locally roasted, good quality stuff, single origin. Yeah, for those of you who might be coffee snobs, fantastic stuff. Support your local roasters. But it's late enough and there are few enough people here that I cannot justify making a whole pot. Plus, I can't now that we've started, but both pots are empty. So, no coffee for me. And it's 30 degrees outside at least. And I have to talk for an hour, especially if I don't want to just have 20 something odd mats at once, which seems a bit wasteful. But that said, even though I don't want there to be silence, I don't really want to just reteach the last 6 weeks worth of material to an empty room, or in this case, to a video that has no viewers. So I don't want to just go over things. I, in theory, could, but it's really not what this is meant to be. And plus, unlike in a classroom setting where you have a limited window of things a limited window of when you can watch my lectures for this class are infinitely rewatchable. So long as you have time, you can listen to the material again. So there is literally nothing novel that I can offer that I haven't already done with PowerPoint slides. So there's not really much purpose of me just teaching material to all this. And I'm rambling, I know. And I'm making excuses, I know. Sorry. I guess I just need something to talk about and it comes to my mind. Hello, first viewer. Welcome. Everything prior to now has been me just talking to myself. So, welcome. If you have questions, feel free to stick them up in the chat window and I will do everything that I can to answer them, no matter what the question is. Otherwise, I will just kind of be here, hanging out, rambling now and then. But any and all questions you have, I will happily answer. So feel free to type things into the chat, and we can either hang out and just talk, go over material, or if you don't really have any questions, if you're just here to hang out and watch what other people ask, or you don't really feel like chatting with me, you're more than welcome just to be here as well. I will just continue hanging out and or rambling. Yeah, so Rebecca, again, for future viewers, if you have chimed in at this point, or you are watching at this point, I don't know if you can see the chat window on the final recording or not. I couldn't on the sample one that I put together prior to the midterm review. So just in case, I'll be reading off questions if you can't see them. If you can, I'm sorry, it's just redundant. But so to address the question, how is the final going to be set up? Like the midterm with short answers or something else? In this case, exactly like the midterm. So the midterm was set up to be a set of short response questions, a couple of which were like the homework problems in that they were problems for you to solve, you know, just like you did for some of the practice homework, while others were things you literally wrote short responses about, like defining this concept or explaining this or so on. And the final will be the exact same thing. It's a set of short response questions. There's at least one or two problems like out of the homework, and the others cover the general concepts that we've been going over. So doing the homeworks is a good way to set up for it because it gives you practice at applying the concepts and doing problems just like the exam covers. And going over vocab from each of the chapters is a necessary thing because knowing that, for one, helps you do the homework because you know what's being asked of you and you know how the concepts fit together, and it'll help you talk about things on that final response. The reason why I do the essay questions for the midterm and final, like not really essay questions, but the short response sort of things, is that this is a critical thinking class, not strictly speaking a logic class, even though most of what we do is looking at various parts of formal logic systems. So strictly speaking, the class's main focus is not, can you come up with a proof for this argument or whatever else? You do need to be familiar with those, but that's not the main focus of the class. Instead, is to help you be better critical thinkers. So knowing the concepts, knowing how to apply them, knowing how they fit together, knowing how to think about these kinds of problems, and how to apply the things we've been talking about, that being the main one, is the main thing that I'm testing for. So that's what the test is sort of built around looking at. So yeah, exactly like the midterm in terms of format. Set of short response questions. You have a time limit. You only have one attempt. Yeah, that about covers it. Good question, though. And any others? Anything else that you'd like to go over? Yeah, absolutely. So actually, if you'll give me just a second, I can better set this up to address your question. And since there's literally only two of you at this point, oh, forgot. People at the 10-minute mark, if you go back to the 7-minute mark, we start having people show up. So if you'll give me just 1 second, there are actually a couple of whiteboards in this room that I can use to somewhat demonstrate this here on camera. So hang on just 1 second for me. I should have thought to move this over in the first place, but that's what I get for not thinking ahead. Somebody has taken the erasers. Lovely. We'll have to use my hand. I'm sorry for whoever it was that was using these prior to now, because I just erased whatever they had sitting on. For those of you who are watching now or not watching earlier, I am currently live from the Matchbox co-working studio where I do some of my work because my office at Purdue is absolutely terrible. And I share it with 3 other people. So I have the usual teaching supplies, but they're not as obviously in place. So let's see how well this shows up. That's not great at all, is it? I've got a couple other choices. Hang on. Come prepared. Alrighty. Again, thanks for bearing with me on this, but hopefully we can address your question as thoroughly as we can so you feel comfortable about stuff. And honestly, I love doing this part, and I just don't get to do it with any of the online classes. I just don't have the tools and software to do much in the way of handwriting while we do stuff. Can you still hear me okay? Great. So, truth tables. How to do them and what's going on with all this. So the point of a truth table is being able to, well, we care about them for 2 main things. One, they help explain what's going on with an argument. We can look at the different combinations of, the different terms and variables, we might call them, in an argument when we've written it out using letters and things. But the main thing we end up using them for is showing whether or not an argument is true, is valid or invalid, almost certainly. Because what a truth table does is, like, say, if I have an argument with a couple of parts to it, like say I do, let's use propositional logic for a little bit, because that's the thing that we mainly do this with. So let's say that I just have the straightforward, oh Lord, it's backwards on the video. Oh. Or at least it looks backwards on my video. Is it backwards to you guys? It's normal for you, really? Huh. Because on my preview, I have like full-on Russian letters going on. So interesting. Good to know. I've only done the live YouTube stuff this semester, so I'm still a little new to all this. So awesome. Let's suppose we have just the very straightforward argument. It has one statement, so you don't get much simpler than this. So if we wanted to write out a truth table for this, what a truth table does is it lays out all the possible combinations of truth and falsity for this argument. So like, for example, this is an argument that has just one statement in it. So like, we can't even really call it like premise conclusion. There's one statement. If P, then Q. But there are two different terms in it, P and Q. So a good truth table, or any truth table that's actually worth the title, is going to list those terms. And what they'll do is we're going to show all the possible combinations of true and false for these two terms. Then, using all those combinations, we fill out the rest of the table for all the different statements and show how the different combinations fit together. This will make more sense in just 1 second. So let's just go left to right with our terms, starting with P. So P can be either true or false, because those are our only two options. So we need to write, and I'm going to use a plus for true and a 0 for false, because T and F start getting confusing when these things get big. So reference up here if you do start to get lost. So P can be either true or false, because we're listing all the possible combinations of our variables, and then we're going to do all the possible combinations for the for the statements in the argument. Sorry, vocab's slipping away from me this time of night. So P can be either true or false. Now, with truth tables, the number of terms you have going on in an argument goes up, the more of them you have. So we need to write out more combinations. So we know that P can be either true or false. We have two terms. So based on the rule in the textbook, where we're putting 2 to the n rows in this thing, that means if we've got 2 letters in the whole thing, that means we need 4 lines. Because 2 to the second is 4. So again, truth table lays out all the possible combinations of true and false for our variables. P can be either true or false, and we've got 2 variables, P and Q. We're just worrying about the letters. So that means I need 4 lines, and P can be either true or false. Those are all the possible values for P. Now, Q can either be true or false. They can either both be true at the same time or different. And again, say if it's false, it can be true, and it could be also false with it. So ignoring this part of it for the moment, we're dealing with just the 2 letters, P and Q. They can be either true or false. They can both be true at the same time. P can be true while Q is false. P could be false while Q is true, or they could both be false. Do you see how this lists all the possible combinations of true and false for these 2 terms? This is the first step for what we've got going on. So, if this lists all the possible combinations for the letters I have in my truth table, and let's say we want to write it out, and you know what, let's add is if P then Q, P. And then let's add in a conclusion. Sorry, I know I'm doing this a little piecemeal, but I'm doing it by the seat of my pants because you asked. So if I'm working with an argument, it has two premises, let's say, and a conclusion. If P then Q, P, therefore Q. There are two letters, so we'll do our two over here. We'll list all the possible combinations of true and false. Then I'm going to plug these in. Just like you plug numbers into a math formula, we're going to plug true and false into each of these. For some of these, that's very, very easy. So like on this row, we just go row by row and fill this thing out. With P, we know it's true. So we know it's going to be true for that other premise because they're the same thing. And Q is true. So when it shows up in the conclusion, it's going to be true. Now, premise one slightly more complicated because it says if P then Q. Here we go back to the definition of this horseshoe if-then thing from the propositional logic chapter. We know that if statements, if P then Q, are only false when the antecedent is true and the conclusion is false. So in this case, they're both true. So this whole thing is also true. Here, we can fill out the same stuff with the next line. P's true, so it's going to be true here. Q's false, so that's false there. And because P's true and Q is false, we look at the definition of this whole thing is going to be false. Because the antecedent's true and the conclusion's false. And so for if statements, that makes the whole thing false. Now, we can do the same thing here. False, true. We know that this is the only situation where that's false. So it's true here. Both false, so that's true. That's false. That's false. So again, basic steps. We have our argument. If P then Q, P, therefore Q. I look at the letters. There are two letters, P and Q. We'll list them over here. And then I fill out all the combinations of true and false for those two letters. Then I just plug those values in for the rest of the argument. Now, this is a full, complete truth table. If you were to look at it in your book, that's a whole truth table. This is a complete, long-form truth table. Now, here's why the hell we do this. This thing is useful because it shows all the possible combinations of true and false for this argument. So, suppose I want to know is this argument valid? That means I'm asking, are there any lines, any combinations of truth values where the premises are true and the conclusion's false? Because that's the definition of an invalid argument. So in this case, are there any situations where these two are both true and that's false? Both true. The only times where the conclusion ends up being false, at least one of the premises is also false. And this lists every possible combination. So we literally know it's not possible for this argument, which happens to be an example of modus ponens, it's got a name, this simple argument. There are literally no possible situations, no matter what I plug in there, there are no possible situations where this argument's invalid. Because every single possible combination of values makes it so that if the premises are true, if these two statements are true, the conclusion must also be true. It's the only way that that whole thing works out. Now, if I had done a different argument, I'll pause and see if this is working for you here in just 1 second, but let me show you this. If this were a different argument entirely, if, say, instead of Q, the conclusion was not Q. For one, we need to change our truth table because this is a totally different argument. So in this case, the not has the opposite of whatever Q is. So here, Q is true, so not Q is false. False, so we flip it to true, true, false, false, true. So here we have a different argument. So let's see, is this one valid? Are there any possible lines where the premises are true and the conclusion's false? Here, the answer is yes. Right here on the first line, we have a situation right here, just by doing this, that this is an invalid argument. Can we do the short form of a truth table since the table will become huge for 4 or 5 statements? Yes, absolutely, because I hate doing these things for that size of argument. I can do it, but I've not had to for like 6 years, and it just gets so tedious. So yes, let's look at the short form, which is thankfully both much simpler and in a way a lot more fun. Though to be honest, I do kind of like this overall. It can get kind of peaceful doing truly giant truth tables. You just fill out things left to right. It satisfies like everybody's inner OCD for that sort of thing. So yes, let's do a short form. But first, any questions about the long version, about how this works? Yeah, I know. If I had a whiteboard or even just like a tablet where I could draw the stuff for the PowerPoint, I know it would help a lot of people. I just literally don't have the technology. And if I do this, I can't mix it with the PowerPoint because when the PowerPoint presentation goes up, the webcam for my computer shuts off. So I can do video or PowerPoint, but not both. Any questions at all, though? I guess there's just the 3 of you at the moment, so if not, let's look at the short version. All right, no erasers, so we're doing it by hand. So let's look at another argument. Well, it'll be a simple and short argument, just to save us some time. But even if it's short, it should demonstrate things perfectly well, because all you do with longer versions of it is more. It doesn't change anything about what's going on. So this time, just to show you what's going on, let me write the argument over here, and then we'll do the truth table for the rest of it, which I should have done in the first place. So let's do another standard, simple, you're going to see this everywhere kind of argument. So let's do another if-then statement, because they keep things nice and short. Only let's do, yeah, we'll deny the antecedent. So here's our argument. If P then Q, not P, therefore, I use these little dots for therefore because it's a pain in the ass to write it out. Therefore, not Q. So this is the argument we're analyzing. So just like with the long form truth table, the short version does the exact same thing. Only when we do the short version, instead of writing every possible combination of values for this, what we do is we try and find the one line we want. Because we actually don't need the whole thing. The whole thing helps us be thorough when we're testing for validity and invalidity, but technically we're just looking for one line. Is there a combination where the premises are true and the conclusion false? So the short version of a truth table tries to recreate that line. And we do that by working backwards. So we'll set it up the same way that we do the long version, but we'll then plug in the values backwards and only do one line of it. So we have 2 letters going on, that is 2 terms in our argument, P and Q. So let's do those columns. We have P and we have Q. And just like before, the number of lines we would normally do, we don't have to worry about that. But we're working with P and Q, and we're working with, let's go ahead and list their opposites since they show up here. So let's put in not P and not Q. Now, the only thing that's not on our table yet is this one. So let's put in this first statement, if P then Q. Now, thinking on my feet, because this is the first time in a little while I've written it out on a board. Let's reorder this just so it's easier to follow. I am changing nothing. I am just rearranging it on my sheet because I should have arranged it this way in the first place. Because it's going to be easier for you guys to follow along with what's happening if I put my letters in the order that they show up in. So literally, changing nothing, just rearranging. Maybe this makes a little more sense now. Got my argument, I've got my variables, my letters, my terms, technically. Then I have the statements in my argument. If P then Q, not P, therefore not Q. So, like I said, for this one, we're working backwards. So, I'm wanting to see, is this an invalid argument? So, I want to see, is there a line? Is it possible for the conclusion to be false while these two are true? So, easiest way to try and build that line is to go ahead and make that false. And so here we just start using our critical thinking and problem solving skills, and we go backwards. So if not Q is false, not Q by definition is the opposite of Q. So if this is my conclusion, I know that that's got to be true. If we're trying to build this, remember, we're trying to see, can I actually fill out everything on this line without running into like a contradiction or something like that? So my conclusion's false. I know I can go ahead and plug that in. And we're trying to see, is it invalid? So I need to make my two premises both true if we're going to actually pull this off. So let's go ahead and make this one true, which means that over here, that's going to be false because not P and P have opposite values. Now, I have both my letters filled out. So awesome, I can pause here then and fill out my last bit. So, P is false and Q is true. Based on the definition of an if-then statement, which is only false when the antecedent's true and the conclusion's false, this is true. Now here, we can go ahead and stop because we've filled everything out on the short form table. If we had a longer argument, we would just keep going. So I would keep on making educated guesses, like not actual guesses, like maybe this is this. I use things I definitely know to keep working backwards. And so I would keep filling this stuff out as I went. Well, we've filled everything out. So let's look at what we have. We have a possible combination of true and false where the premises are both true and the conclusion's false. So this is a line from a long truth table that shows there is at least one situation where this argument has true premises and a false conclusion. That is, it's an invalid argument. And I skipped doing the whole big ass table for it. Does that help with the short version of all this? Any questions about it? Yeah, of course. Working backwards is the main thing I can stress here. Take what you have to have happen, that is, have to work with the conclusion being false, and work backwards from there. Another question. This is not related to truth tables. Can I explain how to use Venn diagrams for categorical logic? Yes, because that's another thing that the marker board really helps with. But Any other questions on this? We've gotten a couple of other people now, so I want to make sure that I get to it. Anything else for truth tables, long or short? Going once, going twice. Okay, let's do the Venn diagram stuff then. So, let's throw up a super generic categorical argument in proper categorical form using the 4 types of statements we got from Aristotle, all that good stuff. I will say the final does stress things from the second half of the semester, so this is less important for the final than units 5, 6, and 7 will be. But this will still be a good thing for you guys to know because it is still possible that it shows up on the final. So let's look at a super generic categorical argument. Let's say that all whiteboards are dirty. All dirty things. And if I'm going to do this in proper categorical form and properly demonstrate it for you, I should not use shortcuts. So let's say dirty things. All dirty things are things which should be cleaned. If I were being lazy and I didn't care about proper categorical form because I wasn't trying to teach you it, I would probably just say should be cleaned. But we're doing this correctly because I'm a good example, or at least I hope so. So all whiteboards are dirty things. All dirty things are things which should be cleaned. Therefore, all whiteboards are things which should be cleaned. Let's use this as our example because it feels very timely given the state of my hand. Which should be cleaned. Forgive my handwriting, I'm doing this a little quickly and messily. So, that's our argument. So, let's do some Venn diagram stuff here. So, in this argument, what we have are 3 different categories, 3 different terms being discussed. We have whiteboards, dirty things, and things which should be cleaned. Whiteboards should be cleaned and dirty. So these are our different terms. If we're doing the Venn diagram stuff to talk about it, we can just go ahead and write out, because we have 3 terms in a standard syllogism. That's a little small. That means we have 3 circles to work with. Make sure you guys can still see that all right. And let's call them, in your book, they're universally labeled A, B, and C. That's boring as hell, and we have actual words. So let's put whiteboards, dirty, and clean. So, cool. So what we do with the Venn diagram stuff, like this is how it works. The argument that is our categorical syllogism has 3 statements. 1, 2, and 3. Each of these statements is really saying this category either is or is not part of this other category. It's saying how categories of things are related to each other. That's what categorical logic does. So we can represent this with a Venn diagram.
For example, if I say that all whiteboards are dirty things, what I mean is that everything that's in this circle is also in this circle. So if I want to mark out, like actually fill in the parts of the whiteboard circle of that category that are actually there, let's say I do it with diagonal lines. The only part of that circle I'm going to fill in is the part that overlaps with the dirty things circle, because all whiteboards are dirty things. I have this whole circle worth of stuff, but it's all clumped on one side. It's not that you don't have any whiteboards hanging out here, because then they'd be outside of the dirty things box. So this whole circle's occupants, like with a lot of Venn diagrams, is hanging out all on one side. So the only part of that circle I fill in is the one that overlaps with the dirty things circle. But this isn't the whole story, because I've only dealt with one of my statements. So let's look at the next one. All dirty things are things which should be cleaned. So let's say I want to do the other direction of diagonal lines to fill in the dirty things box. Now we have a different rule. All dirty things, the only things that are in this circle, are things which also are in this circle. They're things that should be cleaned. So the only part of this I'm going to fill out is the part that overlaps here. So let's do this direction diagonal lines to fill in the dirty things bit. So all dirty things are things which should be cleaned. Everything that's in this circle should also be in this one. Now, that tells us the stuff that's going on with the parentheses. Here's why we do it. This represents the relationships talked about in these two parentheses. What I need to do is check, is the conclusion represented by this circle or this diagram? Is this actually true given the relationships we've talked about here? Once you fill these out, is this a true statement about that diagram? All whiteboards are things which should be cleaned. Now, here's where I can correct my diagram earlier, because I just realized I left off a step. We filled out our first bit. We filled out our second bit. All dirty things are things which should be cleaned. We said before that these two circles have to overlap, because all the things in this circle are hanging out over here. This second statement, though, all dirty things are things which should be cleaned, says that everything in this circle is actually over here. So everything in the whiteboard circle is hanging out on that side. Everything in the dirty things board is hanging out over here. So this second statement actually says I should erase this bit here, because this bit used to be whiteboards that are dirty things but shouldn't be cleaned. And this second statement that everything within this circle is crammed over here, well, yeah. So here, after I've laid those out, all whiteboards are things which should be cleaned. If this statement's true, then the only part of this diagram that has whiteboards should also overlap with this circle. And it does, because this is the last bit of the whiteboards, and it overlaps with the should be cleaned circle. Does that make sense, or should I run through another one of those? I know it got a little bit messy there at the end. Good. Other questions related with this. Do I need to go through another one, or is this still confusing, or did that help? Looks like it helped for at least one of you. I want to make sure for the other two, since it's just us four hanging out. And I can do more than just be the creepy eyeball in the corner of the screen. Of course, it's, literally my job to help, and I enjoy this. I really actually do. I hate online classes because I don't get to do this part, but glad to do that. So, other questions? Anything else from any of our units? We still have at least, another 15-ish minutes to the official review. So, any and all questions, I will make sure and try and answer, whether they involve the whiteboard or just explanation. Be more than happy to help. Anything at all. Will fallacies be on the final? Yes, in the sense that fallacies are part of the units we've been talking about. And so to that extent, yes, finals are a possible topic, fallacies are a possible topic for the final. So you might be asked, what fallacy is this? However, as a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, don't stress that too much. There are a lot of fallacies, and a lot of them are very similar to each other. I'm not worried about you perfectly identifying every single one of them. So you will not be expected to have to specifically, and you won't have to specifically say, this is a post hoc fallacy rather than these other three things that look similar or something like that. That said, you do need to know what the fallacies are. So you might be asked, what is a post hoc fallacy? Or what's wrong when somebody commits a post hoc fallacy? Or what's wrong when somebody makes a hasty generalization? So you'll need to know what the fallacies are. You will not need to specifically identify them and have to get the exact thing going on in this argument. Because again, a lot of them are similar, and it's a little bit debatable as to which one exactly is going on. That a fallacy is happening is very easy to identify, or if not easy, it's something that can be objectively proven. But philosophers, who are the people who worry about a lot of this stuff, can actually, argue back and forth about which exact fallacy is happening. So if we can't do it professionally with 100%, agreement and that sort of thing, I'm not going to expect you to do it for a 2-hour test. So yes, fallacies can be on the final. You need to know what they are. Don't worry about knowing them so well you can identify one versus another in an argument. If you are asked to identify a fallacy, you'll just need to give the best explanation of it you can. Don't worry about, oh God, what if I confused these two minor things? As long as you're in the neighborhood, you're good. Yeah, of course. Other questions? Anything, another thing? Yeah, so I think I mentioned this same sort of thing at the midterm. Is it okay to refer to your notes during the final? I technically can't stop you. You could have a philosophy professor sitting next to you telling you the answers to everything, and I can't stop you. So even if I say I would like you to not use things, there is no way in hell I can actually enforce that. So for one, I don't feel like I can actually say that. Everything in this class has been, in theory, you can do it with your notes in your book open next to you. I don't see any reason why you can't do that. Especially since not doing it would be intentionally limiting your grade, or at least the possibilities of your grade, compared to the people who do it. And that just doesn't seem fair. So as a matter of policy, as my recommendation to you, you are more than welcome to have your notes and things next to you. However, you still need to study, because you need to understand the concepts to answer the short response things, one of the reasons why I ask those.
And I would like you to actually know this stuff. And as a practical point, because the test is limited on time, you may not have the ability to look everything up while you're doing stuff. So, yes, you can have notes and things out, but still study and try and use them as little as possible overall. Is the test cumulative in the sense that it refers directly to the info in the first half? Obviously, it adds on. So in this case, it is not cumulative in that sense. The exam overall will focus on material from the second half of the semester, so units 5, 6, and 7. It is cumulative in the sense that it adds on. So the final's cumulative, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge, focus on the second half of the semester for your studying. Be familiar with the stuff from the first half, because it may refer to it. This is stuff that you do need to know, and some of it's basic fundamentals that help you talk about the other things, like knowing what the ARG conditions are lets you talk about cogent arguments. So you won't have a question about the ARG conditions the way the midterm did, but that doesn't mean you can forget what the ARG conditions are. So focus your studying on the second half, but if there are things you truly don't understand from the first half, like these, it's not a bad idea to spend some time on it. Just don't let it be the thing that sucks all of your energy. Focus more on the second half. Any other questions? Anything at all? Anything whatsoever, I will happily answer, topical or not. How long have I been growing my beard? This is not an easy question to answer, actually. So, yeah, so I guess I'll just go ahead and give you the long version. First off, are there any on-topic questions to answer before I start talking about my personal life? I don't mind doing it. I just want to make sure that if you do have some burning question, that I don't leave you out because I'm talking about my beard. That doesn't seem fair. And I'm literally a professional ethicist. I focus on moral philosophy. Going once, going twice. Okay, beard time. So I've had facial hair since I was 12. I turned 28 this semester. So I have had some form of facial hair continuously for 16 years. No, chapter 12 will not be covered. If there's not a lecture about it, you're not expected to know it. Because we had technical issues at the start of the semester, there's just some material we didn't get to. I hate that that happened. Is not the way I like doing my classes, even especially online classes, but it's just an unfortunate reality. So if there's not a lecture on it, you're not required to know it. Pretend it doesn't exist. Again, I focus on moral philosophy, and I believe very much in trying to help my students succeed. It just isn't fair for me to test you over stuff that I didn't teach. I know that some teachers do that, and it seems insane to me. But yeah, beard. I've had facial hair continuously for like 16 years. So when I started growing it would be when I was 12. When I started getting to this length, which is probably what you're really asking about, like how long does it take for me to get like a decent length on this thing? It was probably a full inch shorter when I got it trimmed in October. So a couple of months. No, I will not make an extra credit question about my beard. That would be fun. I might do that in the future. But technically, the exam's already posted, and I've not looked, but someone could, in theory, have already taken it. And so it's unfair for me to add an extra credit question now when somebody might have already done it. But no, it probably takes me about 2 months to get like this. It grows about a half inch a month or so. Sounds good. You're more than welcome to hang around if you don't have any more questions. Just see if anything else comes up. Even if all of you have asked all of your questions already, we've got another 5 or 6 minutes on this thing. So I will hang out and talk about my beard for 5 minutes if that's what it takes, on the off chance anybody pops in with a question to ask. And yes, it is always worth a try. It can't hurt to ask. So yeah, anything else to talk about for the last 4 or 5 minutes? Topical or not? I guess if I'm going to head off any more beard questions, yes, I trim it. I generally go back to the barber every like 6 weeks or so. I will occasionally trim it myself in the meantime, because apparently my beard is like curly, even though the rest of my head is very much not. So yeah, how long have I been studying philosophy? This is a mildly uncomfortable question because it makes me feel old. So I'm 28. I'm halfway through the 6th year of grad school. I went directly to grad school after undergrad. So I'm not as old as I look. I just went that. I did 3 years in college. I was pre-med bio before that. I did well in it, but absolutely hated it. So I've got a full year of like lab sciences. I've got math up through calculus. I know my science and STEM stuff. I just did not enjoy it, didn't have a passion for it. So 3 years in undergrad plus 5.5 here. So going on 9 years studying philosophy. I have a master's degree from Purdue, working on my doctorate here at Purdue, and I have a Bachelor of Science in Philosophy from the University of Central Arkansas. In other words, I have a BS in philosophy, and I kind of love that. Both for the fun side, and it's an actual BS as opposed to a BA that a lot of people got. Yeah, so what made me switch to it was, like I said, honestly, passion. So I went to undergrad planning on being a doctor. I started off as a pre-med biology major, along with a lot of people in my starting grade class, because the university I went to for undergrad was just a generic mid-sized state school. Solid education, around 15,000 students, not big, not tiny. And I did all the usual classes for that, all the gen eds and requirements and things, and just absolutely hated it. I did well in it. I think I kept like a 3.5 GPA, but I just loathed spending the time on it. So I started looking at alternatives. About halfway through that first year, I finished my second semester because I was at least going to get all of my lab credits and get a Bachelor of Science out of the whole deal. And so I started doing the other responsible thing. I was going to be a lawyer because, of course, that's the only other option if you're considering being a doctor in the first place. So I started looking around at what majors are good for law school. And it turns out that, like with medicine, there are no required degrees you have to have for a law degree. They just recommend that you do things that get you ready for the exam. Just like with med school, they only recommend, like you have to hit a certain set of requirements to go to med school, but a biology degree is not required. You can have an English degree as long as you took enough semesters of biology and anatomy and so on. So I started looking at all the majors that are good for law school, and philosophy made the short list because philosophy majors score higher on the LSAT than literally anybody else, including pre-law, wherever it's offered. They score better on the generic graduate school entrance exam than literally everybody except combined math and physics majors. They score better on business school entrance exams than business majors do, as well as scoring higher than almost anybody else. So philosophy was one of several degrees that was a good stepping stone to law school that looked like it would prep me well for the entrance exams. And so I started going around and window shopping to all the different majors. And so I went to each of the different departments at my university and I spoke to either a professor or the department head asking, like, so what do you actually study in here? And stuff was good. I thoroughly enjoyed writing in English and stuff in high school, so I was like language arts nerd on top of my STEM nerd stuff. I'd always enjoyed it, always done better at it than I did at the STEM stuff. But philosophy was the only department that I sat down with where I didn't want to leave the conversation. I sat down with the department head there, and we just talked for like an hour and a half, not about me, but about the subject matter. And I wanted to keep that conversation going. So it was so fascinating. I wanted to do that because if I'm going to do something to get ready for law school, it might as well be interesting. And so I did that for a little while, absolutely fell in love with the subject, decided I'm going to do a joint law degree and PhD because there are those things out there for masochists, along with the people who do law school and med school at the same time. Same types of programs. It's insane. But I planned on that. And then eventually I admitted to myself I wanted the PhD a whole lot more than I wanted the law degree. And my whole family is in education, so teaching and doing that sort of thing's a natural fit. I love writing. I hate doing online classes, to be entirely honest with you, just because we lose this back and forth discussion, except on rare occasion. But overall, I love teaching, and I try and make these as good as I can anyway with the tools that I have available. And so, yeah, here I am, looking at wrapping up my PhD here in the next year and then figuring out whether to risk an academic job or not. I'll probably always teach part-time at least because I enjoy this. But yeah, that's a personal thing, why I chose philosophy as a field of study. It looked cool. It was absolutely fascinating as a way to get to the professional degrees that I wanted. And eventually I decided I want to make a career out of this one way or the other. And it's not a terrible choice for that. It's a crazy useful general liberal arts degree where the skills, the critical thinking, the writing, the analysis, the communication skills, the things that are universally applicable. So even if I don't go on to teach, I can use my background in it to work in a corporate setting. I can be a consultant of various types. So a lot of things I can try and do with it. I never actually was an engineering student. I had a lot of friends that were engineering students, and I considered it briefly, but I would have had to change undergrad institutions because we only had a physics program, not an engineering one, which I know sounds weird coming from Purdue, but there are schools that don't have engineering programs. And so while I considered it, especially given that my dad is a version of an engineer, I eventually just decided against it. Yeah, well, good. I'm glad it helps, even though I'm not sure what it did, but you're welcome. Always glad to help any way that I can. Anything else, guys? Well, I guess then, since we are at the end of regulation time, to put it one way, we can go ahead and call the review wrapped up then. If you have any other questions, always feel free to reach out to me, email, and so on. But that's all I got. That's all we've got time for. Unfortunately, I've got to catch a bus to get back home. So thanks, guys, for coming out. I hope the end of your semester goes fantastic, that your finals and everything go well. And I'm glad that you guys stuck with the class and came out to the review for us. For those of you watching in the future, you're good students for taking the time to watch this. So I mean the same to you too, not just the 4 or 5 folks who hung around for the actual live version of all this. Proud of all you guys. Thanks for being a part of this. So I guess good luck. May the force be with you. All those other nerdy and very hopeful and encouraging things. And happy thinking, guys, until I run into you next. Cheers.